All right, so back up here. This closes the page, which if you haven't saved yet, we'll give you a prompt. I'm going to go ahead and cancel. This icon here of a floppy disk, which some of you probably don't even know what that is the save icon, which you can click to save. Your pointer tool, so you can click on things and move things around. This is a picture frame, or an image placeholder, so you can drop images into there, pictures into there, which we'll do in a moment. Text boxes, which I played with a little bit. Lines, which you shouldn't bother really playing with. Rectangles, which could be useful occasionally. Circles, which could be useful. This lets you draw other polygons, but like they're not proper. Like it doesn't like do anything nice for you as far as the angles go. So if you want like a polygon besides a rectangle, circle, or square, talk to me. Don't use this because that's going to be a nightmare. On your squares and your circles, if you want a perfect square, hold Shift so the portions are locked. If you want a circle and not an ellipse, hold Shift to lock the proportions as well. Pencil tool, don't use it. You can cut things and then you can paste them if that's what you want to do. You can copy and paste, and Command C and Command V work as well for that. You don't necessarily have to use those up there. If you're on a PC, that should be Control C and Control V. You have undo. Command Z or Control Z also works for undo. Undo only works so well, like right now it won't go back any further than that for whatever reason. It should go back pretty far, but undo is a little buggy, and redo is a little buggy too. Sometimes it behaves itself, sometimes it doesn't. So undo, no, it's like toggling instead of actually undoing. Well, that's what it feels like doing today. Whatever. Oh, sticky notes. So if you want to leave yourself a note for next time, like you don't quite finish, so you can type whatever notes you want to leave for yourself. We can click on this to like hide the note, but it's still there. If we double click, it opens back up, so that can be nice if you don't want it to mar the image. So you can just leave that up in the corner or something if it's sort of a to-do list or whatever. Zoom tool, which you don't really need to use in my opinion. I mean, you can use it, but you also have your zoom down here. I typically use the one down here. And then you've got this whole collection of other stuff. Some of these are kind of cool. So like this lets me repeat something. So if I have it selected, then I can like make an area like that, and it will try to repeat as many times as it can within that space. So that one was kind of a large object, so if I make a smaller object and I tell it to repeat, oops, let's try that again. Click on it, repeat. There we go. Now we have a bunch of them. Now that gap, like if that gap isn't as big as you want, like don't try to manually space it, like that's inefficient. Instead, that gap is actually in your properties in the file menu that we looked at a moment ago. So let me pull that up and show you. So if we go here, preferences, not properties, that's this right here. So if we change this to like 10 or whatever we want, now if I do this again, you'll notice a obvious difference. So now they're quite spaced significantly more. And you can change how much it's spaced on the horizontal or the vertical. You don't have to do them both the same. As you saw, I changed them, literally both of them. You could change one and not the other. So that's kind of cool. This image placeholder, we made this a few minutes ago, right? So how do we actually put an image in there? I'll put an image in there and then I'll show you the flipping. So I can go up here to open content view. And thank you for being noisy, computer. And I can go to breaks and find one of the photos I uploaded. And I can drag the photo in. Let's drag in the better one. Scaled to fit or unscaled. So if I do unscaled, this is the photo's actual size. So this is a big photo. If my photo was low quality, like maybe it was taken on a cell phone or something, then it might be much smaller. So I don't want it that big. Let's try to redrag it in again. This time I'll say scaled. And this makes it fit within the size of that. So Yeah, so I can manually go into the inspector, and I can go to image inspector and adjust, and I can change the scaling to make it bigger or smaller. So that's useful. You don't ever want this to go above 100, because if it's above 100, that means that you are printing it larger than the photo actually is, and it's going to be pixelated and gross. So don't do that. All right, so we'll close that, and you can flip. Well, this doesn't want to flip, does it? Nope. Will this flip? So if I pull a piece of this photo out, you can see what it's doing. So it is actually flipping it, but it's not flipping the photo, it's flipping the box. So if I click one, then the other, and I right click and I tell it to subtract, it will subtract the second one from the first one. And now if I tell it to flip, there you go. So it's flipping, but it's only flipping the container. If I want to flip the photo, I can do that over here in effects, and I can flip horizontal or vertical. Now keep in mind that when you're flipping horizontal, if someone's hair parts a certain direction, which most people's do, it's going to be backwards. If someone has writing on their t-shirt, it's going to be backwards. So very rarely is it okay to flip horizontally. And I don't know why you'd flip vertically. It's kind of the same issue. Things are still going to be backward, and they're going to be upside down. So I don't know why you'd do that. Grayscale, invert, like don't do any of this stuff. If you need to edit the photo, edit it in Photoshop and then re-upload it. The only thing you should mess with in here is scale, or maybe if you need to, like if you realize the photo's not straight in here, you could rotate it in here if you needed to, instead of going back and forth between Photoshop. These are kind of cool. So if we want all of these things lined up nicely, so they're all aligned left or aligned right or aligned top or bottom. So they're kind of neat, aligned middle. So that could be potentially useful. You can play with those. We talked a little bit about the text box already. So when you have the text box here, you notice that you have these options here that were grayed out before. So if I highlight this, I can choose one of the fonts that's in here. You don't have all the fonts. Your fonts are limited because we don't need all the fonts in the world. You should be using like Olympia for main text, for titles either Nexa Rust or this Papia or Puppet, because it's very close to Bauhaus, and I can replace it with the actual Bauhaus font when we actually send it to the publisher. So we can go with Puppet. You can change the size here. You can underline, you can outline. Some fonts allow bold and italics, but not all of them do. So it just depends on that particular font. Alignments, so left, center, right, justified. You should pretty much be using left most of the time. A title might be okay with centered. Sometimes a caption might be okay with right, depending on where it is, but the vast majority of the time it should be left aligned. This aligns it vertically within the box. You've got spell check, and then you've got the marking the names, which I mentioned a little while ago. You've also got your inspector here, so type inspector, so I can do more things. If I have multiple lines, like let's put Austin Williams back in here. We've got leading, so this changes how much space is between the lines. You can also change the character spacing. So those could be useful sometimes. Now, if it comes to a title on the page or a subtitle, you can play with those. But when it comes to body text, so like let's say that we have a whole bunch of text in here. All right, so obviously it doesn't all fit. So obviously I can make it smaller. Oops, smaller. Now when it comes to the main body text, we need a specific size. So we don't want the book to have all different sizes. Your main body text, it should be 9 and it should be medium. So that's the main body text. Now if you have a photo, so reopen that, drag this in, We'll just pretend that this is a relevant photo. Captions are a little bit different. So Austin Williams is visiting Austin College over the summer during his junior year. Not a great caption, but it'll work. Now this is actually a photo from Greece, but whatever. This should be size 8, and we want this to be actually medium condensed. So that's what we're doing for those. And let's change this to, what did I say? Puppet, because that's close to. Or, if you don't like Puppet, Papia. That's most of what you need to know, really. Pretty much everything else, I mean, you can play with things and look at other things too. You might want to have some shapes in here. So we can have a solid. We can add some transparency in there. The transparency does not affect the stroke if you're under fill, because this is the transparency for the fill. We can do the master transparency here, which should then affect both. We can do different things. Don't do shadows. Shadows are gross. Don't do any strokes except for standard. Either no stroke or standard. Don't do the others. They're gross. We're not using rounding radius for this book. You could rotate if you wanted to, but don't skew. Skewing is weird. Other than that, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much your rundown of StudioWorks. Now, when you want to see what it actually looks like, you can do this, like I've said, and that gives you a good idea of how it's probably going to print. If you want to see it without all these little lines, we can go under Preferences, and we can tell it that we don't want to see object outlines, and then that helps too. They're still there when we click on the object, but they're not there when we're not clicked. So there's a pretty quick crash course in StudioWorks. If you want to know how to do something more specific, let me know, but that should be what the majority of you need. So save, of course, close the page, log out, and we're good.